Hello, Fariza. It's very nice to have you on my podcast today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to finally meet you.
Yeah, finally, we have tried to agree this 3 times, and finally we're here.
Yeah.
Uh, and indeed, pleasure to have you. You are a TV panelist on TalkTV. You've been very vocal about your views on feminism, on abortion, on relationship-related topics. So I have prepared a special show for you. I've
I'm very
prepared I've prepared 10 questions, which are the most Googled questions, the questions that people are most excited to hear answers about from somebody who supports feminism, who supports this kind of movements. And it will be followed by 10 rapid questions. They will be in the format of something or something, this or that. So you will have to select, for example, prosperity, economic prosperity, or good military, and you will say economic prosperity. So it will be a very quickly, a very quick section of the podcast. Can we begin?
Yes, sounds perfect. Sounds super great, exciting.
Let's see what we have on our first question. First question. I will just unstick this thing.
Okay.
Yeah, the first question is a very classical one. What feminism is really about in 2025? Quite a good question, I think.
That's a perfect question because I think there's a major split between the Western feminism and
Mm,
what I believe in is feminism around the world and especially less developing countries. So for me, feminism nowadays is about gender equality. It's the same thing that feminism kind of originated from is gender pay gap, same opportunities, voting, because let's be realistic. The problems that we have here in Western society is very much champagne problems to what's happening in less developed countries like Taliban,
mm.
where they've completely, blocked women from getting higher education, from getting medical treatment from men. But how can they ever get a medicine treatment from women if they're not allowed to get higher education? So that's the problem I'm talking about. The gender narratives, the expectations of what a woman should do. So for me, this is feminism. And even then, in the Western world, we still have a lot of rights, which is a great thing. It's perfect. But we also still have a lot of, gender pay gap is an issue. Getting mortgages for a woman
I
is
mean,
a
I would argue we have exactly the same rights as men and women in the Western world.
yeah, you have exactly the same rights, but depending on the company, depending on the situation, it's harder for women to progress sometimes. And I'm not talking about, that it's a common occurrence, but it's a thing. Getting a mortgage as a woman is harder. And I've actually had this conversation, believe it or not, with a man who is
Mm.
very right wing, very conservative. And I've asked him if you had two candidates applying for a job, one's a woman and one's a man, equally the same, went to the same university, got the same degree, who would you likely to get for a job? And he said a man because he's
Seriously.
not, yeah, because he said he's not gonna go on maternity leave because he's not gonna leave me when I need him the most because, oh, guess what? He's pregnant. And that really shook me to my core because I'm like, we still live in the world where that's an issue, where being a woman stops you from getting certain things. And that's the problem. And that's why I keep fighting. And specifically more for less developed countries where I come from in Kazakhstan, we have,
Mm.
Kazakhstan is quite developed in comparison to like Afghanistan or Pakistan or Turkmenistan when it comes to women's rights. But still, gender expectations and the whole shaming at times of not being able to express your own opinion, freedom of speech is not necessarily existent there for women. So I think it's important to still fight for that, especially for women who don't have a voice. So that's what feminism is about to me.
But how do you make it financially equally great for people who are recruiting others who are in charge of some corporation? How do you make it financially equally as great to select women as men? Because this person was worried about maternity leave, which would take unarguably would take some of the benefits, some of the money from his company. So how do you make it equally as, let's say, profitable for the company to recruit women?
Well, I think also nowadays you also get paternity leave. You know, in my company, there's a lot of people.
But it's very
go
small, and
paternity-
you know.
It's a lot smaller. I do understand, but I think it's just women can offer a lot too, very different to what men can offer. Because men can offer a lot too, coming from their experience and the way they view life. You know, emotional intelligence is also a thing that women have, and I think so do men. I mean, I'm not against men.
I was
I'm
about
just
to
saying-
catch you there.
But I'm just saying, in terms of like men and women, we're fundamentally different. And it's important to understand that a business can benefit from having a woman as much as they can benefit from having men, but in very different ways. You know, the way we think is different. The way our brain and logic works is completely different. So, I mean, financially, I think it's hard to say because every company has different, fiscal responsibilities and fiscal problems and whatnot. But in general, I don't think that being a woman should have an effect on whether or not you get the job or not. Just because we can procreate and,
Mm.
create new lives is actually a blessing. You know, it's a wonderful thing that only women can do, only biological women can do. And that shouldn't cost us the job or the promotion, I believe.
Okay, I'm sure we'll get to more, but just to get through this quicker, let's go to the second question. Second most Googled question. And this is, it's kind of refusing to come up.
What's in it?
Let's see. Why do some people say feminism has gone too far?
Because and I've actually had this conversation before where social media plays a huge role. And it's like that with everything, social media pushes the narrative of extremeness, whether it's about politics or whether it's about feminism or anything really. You only tend to see the other side being quite extreme because day-to-day life doesn't matter for people anymore. What they see is, trans rights are, because now, feminists like me and other people, like J.K. Rowling, she's a feminist, technically, let's say. But nowadays, people say, oh, you're not a
very,
real
very
feminist.
attacked feminist nowadays.
Yeah. Now, we're called, oh, you're actually betraying women because you're not pro-trans woman. But no, because all these years, I think, this recent years specifically, where women has been pushed aside, when it comes to sports and letting trans women play and compete at the same exact level as biological women, it's completely unfair. It's scientifically incorrect. And I think that's where you see feminism going too far. And also this narrative of quite supercharged feminists screaming the fact that, women are superior to men, or which is not true. Women are we are just different. And I think that's really important to keep pointing at the fact that we're different and we need to learn how to coexist and we need to learn how to appreciate each other's strength. I think that's where you see this whole narrative that feminism's gone too far. Or I've also heard, oh, don't you have enough rights? I've heard that before where it's like,
well, technically, that's what I've been talking about. We're equal before the law. But of course, there are some nuances that we need to take into consideration that go beyond equality before the law. But those nuances are extremely hard to take into account. And those nuances also exist for men. So I would argue the thing that's paramount is equality before the law. It has been achieved in Western societies, in the developed countries. And hence, many people are arguing that, what are you fighting for? Because everything has been achieved.
Everything has been achieved, but let's talk about, okay, that's the law. But if we talk about like societal issues that women have in comparison to men, like in relationships, women are expected to do certain things, especially considering where you come from. If you come from
depending on the country very much. I think in Britain it's still 50-50. Europe is developing into a 50-50 society. So.
Well, you say that, but now, with the rise of traditionalism and with the rise of the Andrew Tate and stuff like that. It's really
He's not on the rise anymore.
well, he's not, but guys, little, if not little boys, but like teenage boys, adolescent boys, they are really affected by what people say on social media and what narratives they push. Like, the whole TV series Adolescence, that really showed some problems. We don't have an epidemic of young, violent men. But it is true that men sometimes view women very differently, like below them, or they bully them in school, in high school, whatever it may be. In the eyes of the law, we are equal. However, and societal expectations from a woman are completely different. Especially from parents, they expect more from a girl, whether, if they have a son. Like for me, for example, my parents always expected me to do a lot more than my brother, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the culture where I come from. And
like house chores and stuff.
House chores, school, everything really. Appearances. And I'm not talking about just my family, it's my friends and everyone that I know. Girls had different expectations from men, don't dress, don't wear this, you're asking for it, or this is too prudish, at your own age. Like all of these things, they're getting pushed and shoved down our throats. Whereas like with men, oh, boys will be boys. That is a sentence that I used to grow up hearing all the time.
I don't know, but perhaps women and men, not perhaps, certainly those are two different types of people in the society. And of course, there will be different kinds of expectations of them. And I think it's perfectly normal that some family decides to be traditionalist and to educate their girls to do certain 100%. Things. And on the contrary, some people prefer to be, 50-50 and divide everything, split everything in two parts.
I agree.
So that's perfectly fine.
That is perfectly fine if the woman chooses to live by that. The problem I have, and a lot of feminists do have, is when, for example, a woman doesn't want to be a stay-at-home mom, or cook dinner. She wants to work, but her husband or her family is not letting her do that, and she's being forced to live in a life that she doesn't want. That's
then it's not the right husband, right?
Yeah, well, you say that, but sometimes it's really, really hard. Honestly, also depending where you come from, but in the eyes of the law, for example, let's talk about less developing countries, because that's the feminism that I care about, for giving a voice to people who don't have a voice. Let's talk about in the eyes of the law. It's so shameful to get a divorce, or it's so shameful to, if you're not a virgin, forgive my French, but if you're not a virgin, it's shame on you. How are you going to find someone else in some countries? And all these expectations, your family is not willing to take you back if you've somehow embarrassed them in front of other people. Can't make it work if you can't find a compromise with your husband, or like this whole thing. I'm sure in the post-Soviet countries, that's a whole thing. Like behind a strong man is a strong woman. It's like, why does she have to be behind? Why can she not be alongside with him? I'm all cool with traditionalism if that's what a woman wants to do. Or if she wants to be a stay-at-home mom, or if she doesn't, if she's a working mom. Anything that you want to do deep inside and you're doing it, that's what feminism is about. Empowerment. No judgment. Because you also get feminists that judge other women who want to stay at home and want to have all these kids and they don't want to work. That's also completely normal. As long as you're happy and as long as you're doing what you want to do, then good on you. That's I don't want society and societal expectations to affect what a woman can do. So that's my kind of problem.
Okay, let's see. Let's see what we got next. Can you be a feminist and still enjoy traditional gender roles?
Yes, 100%. I think, for example, let's say me. I grew up in quite a traditional culture. Kazakhstan is a Muslim country, and my family is quite westernized in a way. They're very, they're very aware of what's happening. But I like tradition. I'm probably not going to work for the rest of my life. At one point when I want to start a family, I might prefer to work at home and build that family. Like, for example, for me, I think ever since I was a kid, I used to think I'm born to be a mom. Like I want to have 4 to 5 kids, and that's the beauty of life because only a biological woman can really do something as magical as creating a child, obviously with the help of a man, but still, it's, and I think there's completely nothing wrong with being traditional and having gender roles. As long as, like I said before, as long as that's not being pushed on you, as long as you're doing it for the right reasons because you want to do it. The problem I start having is when you don't want to do that, you want to work, but you're being forced
I
to
get that, yes. But of course, I would argue that if you don't want to do that and somebody is forcing you to do that, unless it's your family, you can't just abandon your family, right? But unless it's your family, if it's like your partner, then you're perfectly entitled to get a divorce, and that's not forbidden, and you can escape the marriage. I would argue nowadays escaping the marriage is easier than ever before.
Oh, 100%. I agree with you. However, we also need to take into account if she is a stay-at-home mom because he didn't let her work, for example, right? And she's been spending all her time taking care of the kids and him in the house. How is she financially stable enough to walk away? And, this is the reality. And I'm not saying that, oh, she doesn't have money, so she can't walk. That's not, you've got options. However, realistically speaking, and I'm sure you know stories about people who had to stay in a marriage because that's the only thing that made sense for the sake of the children, for the sake of herself. You don't have enough money. You don't have your own place. You don't know where to go if you haven't been working for the past 10 years, for example. I do
But
think
that's also sometimes good because it preserves marriage in a way when one person is working and he's tied to work, he's tied to make money, and he's tied by his children, by the alimony, for example. There are many laws that prevent men from divorcing nowadays, men from abandoning women in the wrong point of life. And in the same way, many men would demand their woman to be tied to them in a marriage by, financially, for example. So he provides for her, and hence she's ready to do everything for him in return.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. If that's what works for them, if that's what they talked about, which is another point that I think is super important nowadays, is we're able to talk about things before, before marrying each other and before,
absolutely,
therapy. Not like back in the day, that was not a thing. Like our parents or the generation before, like they didn't know anything about relationship psychology, and now we've got so many books, and red flags and what's a toxic relationship. So I think it's important that we now have the opportunity to get to know a person and what's good for you and what's not good for you before you start a family, because at the end of the day, starting a family is a beautiful thing, and if you're ready to do so, then I'm really, really hoping that that you can make it work, because getting a divorce and splitting up families and having like kids,
that's horrible.
That is not that you want. That's not what you want to do. And the reality of it is now, it's like 1 in every 2 marriages end up in divorce nowadays.
Well, in Ukraine, it's 80%, 80. So it is insane.
Yeah, like in Kazakhstan too. And I think it's also because people in post-Soviet countries and people in like Muslim countries and less developing countries, they tend to get married way younger than in the Western. Like 20, 23, 24 is actually quite, like, it's not even young to get married. It's actually quite average to get married at 24. Whereas in the UK or in the US, 24 is like, what? You're still a child. Like, what do you mean? You have so much of your own stuff to do. But yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing in the Western world that you have the flexibility and the freedom to talk about stuff with your partner before you make that move, or even like moving in together before getting into a marriage to see whether or not the traditional gender roles work for you and what you want from each other. So as long as you want to do traditional gender roles, good for you. I'm happy for you. And I will. Yeah.
I agree. Let's see. Question number 4. Number 4, yeah. Oh, this is a very interesting one. Do men have any say in abortion decisions?
Oh, this is a tricky one because my feminism rage wants to say no. Um,
Okay.
and I am sticking with no. Like 90% is a no. However, the 10% is, let's say you're married, you know, and you've been talking about having kids, but all of a sudden you don't feel ready, or you got this opportunity at work and you cannot have a kid right now. That way you can have an actual sit down proper conversation because you're talking about family. But when it comes to if you're a single woman and you've got pregnant, and this guy who got you pregnant, he doesn't have a say 100%. He does not have a say in whether or not you keep the child because unless he proves to you that, 100% I'll be there, I'll marry you if that's what you want, I promise you. Or if it's like a one night stand situation, why is it that some men tend to think that, oh, this is my child, I have a say in what's going on? You're not the one pregnant. You're not the one experiencing all those symptoms. You're not the one that's literally giving everything that you have to that unborn fetus. He depends on the oxygen that you give him. He depends on the food and everything that a woman provides. So I
But
don't
also,
think
of
that it's up
course,
to man.
of course, the argument comes here is that first, if that was a partnership, if that was a marriage, let's say, if that was a relationship, of course, then the question would come up. Well, doesn't a man want to have a say as well? Because that was the collective decision, and then if you're all of a sudden not ready, he would feel kind of betrayed. And I can understand men who feel betrayed because they're not listened to, even though it's your body and even though it might be your decision legally. Of course, it's very rational to have this talked about at home rather than just
Oh
taking the
yeah.
decision further. And if that's another situation when it has been a one night stand or perhaps at the party, which is crazy to me, but let's imagine this. Uh, then I would argue that it was quite your responsibility to make sure it doesn't happen.
Yes, but contraceptive isn't 100% effective. For all you know, like what if he had an
No, yeah,
expired version
it's
of
nine
contraceptive?
90%, 90% effective.
Yeah, but for example, birth control. The thing is, women's fertility is such an issue that is completely different to every single woman. Depending on your hormone levels and whatnot. Like, for example, the birth control that you have as a woman, for example, the pill that you take, it can sometimes it can't even work for you. You need to make
Mm.
sure that it's the right one that you're taking. And
Well,
the
that's why you
use
consult with a doctor.
Yeah, but the reality of it is in the Western world, you can go to Boots, you can go to anywhere, you can just get one. You can do an online consultation,
No,
but
but
it's
that's
not
not
the
the
same.
proper way to do it. That's not the proper way to
That's
do
not
it.
the proper way to do it, but women's hormones and like when you're 16 and 17, what do you know? You're basically a teenager. You're a teenager driven by hormones. And I'm just saying, 1 in 5 women has got PCOS. And doctors tell you that PCOS can really affect your fertility. There's a really small chance that you can get pregnant. So for all we know, she can think, okay, I'm safe then if I can't really get pregnant right now, or whatever it may be. It's sometimes it just happens. Mistakes happen. People got pregnant while they were using all sorts of contraceptive methods.
This
And
happens, but very,
it's
very
rare, but
rarely. Very,
it's
very
rare, but
rarely.
it happens. And I think sometimes you also get really bad situations where men lie and they say that, I've used,
Mm.
especially if it's like, I wouldn't know, but I've heard stories of people that I know on the internet and stuff like that. Horrible things happen when people lie that they've used a contraceptive method, both men and women. Or it's really hard. I don't think he's got to say in any way, even if it was her mistake, but it's her mistake to make. It's her responsibility at the end of the day. She's the one that's going to have to give up a lot of her own health and a lot of her own time to that child, whether or not she decides to keep it. So I don't think anyone has got to say. If you're in a relationship, if you're in a partnership, a conversation, yes, 100%. You need to have a conversation. But I think at the end of the day, if she says no, then that's the verdict. That's final. You cannot, make someone, you cannot force someone to have a child. And I think Because if you do, let's say, and she says, okay, at the end of the day, she's gonna resent you. Like, psychologically speaking, there's gonna be some sort of resentment towards the person who's made you, like, lose your job and have a child that you didn't want to have in the first place. So I think in order to avoid a lot of PTSDs and trauma and breakups and divorce, is actually just talk about whether or not you're ready. And if you're not, then that's the reality. You're just not ready. You need to be able to use your reproductive rights. That's my opinion.
Okay, number 5. Let's go through the rest. A bit quicker. I will try not to interrupt you too much. Although I have a big temptation because sometimes I do not agree with some points. But I will
That's
try.
okay.
I will try.
I'm used to debating.
Is toxic masculinity a real thing or just a buzzword?
I think it's a real thing. It's not an epidemic that sometimes social media makes it out to be, like every single guy is toxic, or every single guy is a walking red flag. Like, no. And sometimes that's where, again,
This narrative is horrible.
Coming back to the question, like, where feminism goes too far, that's one of the examples where they act women are superior to men and all men are toxic and red flags and all of that. That's not true. But also, let's talk about the rise of Andrew Tate. That's toxic that's, to me, is the definition of toxic masculinity and what it represents. And also, just in general, where you come from is a thing. Culture is a thing. Countries and everything. So toxic masculinity is definitely a problem, especially in relationships and toxic relationships where men really, really show their true colors sometimes, when they get abusive, whether it's psychological or, God forbid, physical. And that happens because, I'm the man, so we have to listen to what I say. We have to do because I know what's best. And you have to listen to me because you're a woman.
Well, it's the sort of traditional roles that if another partner does not agree to, then it just doesn't work.
No, I agree. It doesn't work, but sometimes, love is in question there. You can love someone who's bad for you, unfortunately. And that happens a lot, and especially with your first relationships, when you don't really know what's best and what's not. So you just decide to stay and kind of, but maybe that's normal. That maybe this is just a rough patch. But no. And to be honest, toxic men like that, they probably could end up with someone who doesn't mind that toxic narrative, of like following a man and just letting him do whatever he wants to do. As long as he's doing it in a normal and healthy way where he can talk to you and explain it rather than just saying, no, that's final because that's what I want, point blank, There's a difference. And that's why I think this is a problem. Toxic masculinity is where you just expect and you're entitled to just because you're a man, so you think you're just better.
Let's get into the next one. Do feminists support or oppose OnlyFans and sex work?
Do feminists support? I think some do. I don't specifically support that in a way.
So you don't think it's empowering or any other bullshit that's out there?
No. I don't believe it's empowering. I think it's another way around. The thing is, you do you. That's what feminism is about. However, I would not wish that upon myself. I would not wish that upon my daughter. And I think that says a lot. If you want to do that, you're probably doing it for the reasons of, like, you're coming from a bad background where you need money. That's quick money. That's the problem with OnlyFans. Now it's taking good young girls, into that because it's easy money.
They weren't good in the first place if they could do an OnlyFans. I don't believe that.
Well, let's argue because, a young mind is very...
Yeah, you can get misleaded, but I mean,
you can get misleaded. It depends on...
If you can still get into that.
I guess you gotta have a strong brain on your shoulders, strong head on your shoulders in order to not to fall into that pattern. But it's not empowering. You're actually selling your body for money. You're actually feeding into that male gaze, which is kind of against the narrative, in my opinion, of feminism. You're literally selling your body for men to just look at you and just, you know what I mean? And then actually the only
not quite empowering. Yes.
And OnlyFans has created a lot of toxic masculinity towards women nowadays. Unfortunately, like, oh, if you wear that, or they just feel like they're entitled to your body. A lot of young, unfortunately, who are toxic. I'm not talking about all men. I never do. I actually like men, and I just like to point it out again.
Oh, very nice to hear from a feminist nowadays.
Because sometimes people twist your words, It's like, oh, you're a man hater. I'm not. We are fundamentally different, and it's important to realize that we need to learn to coexist and respect each other. That's what it's about. But yeah.
So yeah, very short no.
No.
You don't support. Okay, let's see. Why does feminism never talk about men's issues like suicide?
I think because we have a lot of our own issues to talk about, and I think it's important. I mean, definitely, the rate of suicide has been going up, and mental health is really, really it's going down of young people, especially men, because of also societal expectations. Sometimes for men, it's hard to struggle. It's hard to balance life and work and personal life and all of it. You can get tangled with everything. It's important to talk about it, but I think that like what feminism is about isn't necessarily about men's mental health struggles. So that's why it comes across like we're not talking about it. Because feminism isn't really about men. And there are a lot of, therapists and psychologists who are talking about it, who are, who happen to be women, and maybe they are feminists. Yeah. And it's
so you would argue that's a separate issue for the separate movement.
I think it's a separate movement, a separate issue, because I don't think if there was kind of like a correlation between women's feminism movement and the rise of men's suicide rates, but I don't think they're related. So that's why I think it's definitely an important topic to talk about. And it's really heartbreaking.
Question number 8. Why is feminism alienating young men instead of including them?
Young men?
In other words, why is feminism not resonating with young men as much as women?
Like I said before, I think social media plays a massive role in this, because what young men probably see on social media is the extreme narrative that I've mentioned before. It's like, oh, women are superior to men. Women should have more rights, but it's actually not, it's actually not about that. And I think that a lot of young men are not necessarily understanding of the origins of feminism and why so many, common sense talking feminists actually argue for is gender equality, having the same rights, no societal pressures or expectations or just stuff like that. And I think what they see is the woke narrative, the extreme feminism. And that's the reality. If they understood more, if they maybe read about the history of feminism and actually talked to a lot of common sense feminists, then they will understand.
Number 9 would be, how are women oppressed in developed countries like the UK?
I think let's be blunt here. Realistically speaking, when it comes to, gender equality here, it's pretty equal. But in the recent years, women have
been very equal. Absolutely equal.
In recent years, biological women have been pushed aside for the narrative of trans women. And actually, what happened a few months ago or a month ago, I don't remember exactly, but I remember everyone was talking about how it was important that now, the court ruled that a woman is a biological woman. So someone who was born a woman is actually a woman. And that's important. That's where it was unequal. That's where, really, if you look at J.K. Rowling, that's what most feminists were actually fighting against in the recent years. Not necessarily so that women are so unequal towards men in comparison to men in the UK. But sometimes abortion rights, is a big thing. And on the 2nd of June, the parliament is going to be debating abortion. So, I mean, we shall see what's going to happen. Hopefully, it's going to turn into our favor. If not, there will be an uprising of women, I believe.
Women revolution, first in the history.
Women revolution. Because honestly, if in the Western world, like in the US, if they're going to cancel abortion, if they're going to criminalize abortion, we are heading down a really wrong and twisted path.
I don't think abortions are ever in danger in this country. in the country of
Well,
the UK.
I mean, let's hope. If you listen to Nigel Farage, I mean, he was talking about making it illegal. So it's really scary and shaky. But hopefully, common sense is gonna rise up.
Let's see, quite interesting. And the last question to wrap this up: is feminism too focused on the West?
Yes. That's where I
I'd agree with that.
100
Yes.
I 100% agree with you, because sometimes I listen to these narratives and I listen to these supercharged Western feminism, and I'm like, what are you even, what are you talking about? Why are we not talking about women under the Taliban rule? Why are we not talking about women who needs us to be
Absolutely,
fighting
yeah.
for them? The women of war crimes, like all of that. This is what feminism should be about. Women in the Western world, where we have the freedom to speak out, where we have the freedom to stand out for people who don't have that freedom. And I think that's where we're really becoming corrupt, and we're really becoming too woke for our own good. We need to be focusing on the realities, and we need to be focusing on the people who don't have a voice.
Fariza, I'm aware you have only about 5 minutes left before you have to leave for your own things. So I will ask you 10 very quick questions on which you answer one word, maybe a few words explanation, whatever you want, but it has to be very quick.
Okay.
Equality or equity?
Equality. I think equality is important.
Trans-inclusive feminism or gender-critical feminism?
Trans-inclusive feminism, inclusive but not superior. That's different.
Say sorry first or wait in the relationship?
Who?
Yeah.
It depends on the situation. If you're the one that screwed up, say sorry. If you're not, you don't want to.
So generally wait.
So generally, no. Maybe say sorry first.
Okay. Paid maternity leave or universal childcare? Which one would you prefer?
That is a really tricky question.
It's a very hard question.
Depending on the personal life and personal circumstances, but I think maybe universal child credit. I think
women-only spaces or gender-neutral spaces?
Women-only spaces, specifically. What if we're talking about changing rooms in schools specifically? I think women-only spaces are more important.
Complain more or stay silent?
Stay silent and push through it. I think it's important to stay strong and keep doing it.
Okay. Right to an abortion or right to work? This a very challenging one that has nothing to do with the reality.
Nothing to do with one or the other, to be honest.
Very interested to hear your take.
Right to abortion or right to work? I can't answer that, because it's two different things. Right to abortion is, let's say if we lived in a world where women don't work, right to an abortion is more important. I can't answer that, I think.
One word answer.
For me, I don't know. I can't answer that, because, you can get women who work and want to have an abortion. It's really hard to choose one or the other. It's really
what comes to your mind? First thing that comes to your mind that would be more important to you?
I mean, right to work, I guess. Right to abortion, exact level of importance, though. Very different.
Men should cry or men should be strong?
Men can cry. That's the whole other narrative that I don't understand. It's like, oh, you're a guy, you can't cry. Boys cry too, men cry too. And it's important to, be in tune with your emotional side, because that's when you start going to the toxicity side of it all, when you live with your demons in your head and you don't know how to deal with your emotions. So yeah, cry if you need to.
Can't recall the last time I cried, but I don't know, maybe that makes me toxic.
No, you're not toxic. You have good energy.
Win arguments or agree to disagree? What do you like most?
Then it depends on who you're arguing with. I think when it comes to feminist issues, win. When it comes to political debate, agree to disagree.
Okay. Keir Starmer, this one is insane. Keir Starmer as a prime minister or Andrew Tate as a prime minister?
Keir Starmer is prime minister all the way. I don't understand all the hate towards him. I quite like him.
He's very new, so he has a lot of time still to prove that
Yeah,
he's very
can
good.
turn it all around, which he is trying to do. So I believe in him. Some people at work may call me crazy, but hey, I like him. I think he can make it. He can make a difference, I believe, if he really, starts communicating in the right way with people.
Fariza, thank you so much for being on the show and all the best.
Oh my God, thank you so much for having me. This was really, really fun. Thank you.